Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
How good it is to be together again. What a long, strange trip it's been. And yet, the time seems to have passed in the blink of an eye. When I was young, growing up in a city a couple hundred miles north of here, for reasons beyond my control, I was unable to attend Hebrew school. As I saw each one of my classmates call to the Torah for bar mitzvah, I vowed to myself that I would learn Hebrew someday. And though I thought that my opportunity to become bat mitzvah had passed forever, I believed I could still learn enough to at least follow the services. Years passed, or should I say many years passed. And while I did gain a working knowledge of the alphabet and I could follow along ever so slowly, I never mastered the ability to read on my own at a respectable pace. A few years ago, on a Shabbat in this synagogue, a friend of ours became bat mitzvah at the age of 93. I marveled at her deft and confident recitation of her Torah portion. I spoke with her about it, telling her she inspired me. A few years later, the opportunity to participate in Sheriff's B'nai Mitzvah program arose. After a failed first attempt to attract sufficient participants, the project was green-lighted and we commenced our journey. Toward what exactly, I wasn't certain. 1 month before our first meeting in November 2019, you may recall our Sheriff neighborhood was hit by a tornado. I remember distinctly going around the room that first meeting, describing our motivations for wanting to become bar or bat mitzvah, and inserting anecdotally any impact the tornado may have had on our lives. We came for many reasons. As for me, I missed my bat mitzvah the first go-round. Others, as Jews by choice, had a desire to supplement and deepen their commitment to Judaism, to serve as helpers and examples for their own young children, to come full circle, as one described it. Still others who had been bar or bat mitzvah at the age-appropriate time came seeking reinforcement and rededication, a chance to reaffirm the beauty and meaning of the ritual, a way to continue to honor the memory of a loved one, and perhaps add to their knowledge along the way. Some came to refresh their understanding of Torah and Shabbat and to brush up on Hebrew. At the beginning of our journey together, we thought the tornado was the big news. Little did we, nor anyone else in the world, know that 4 months later, the COVID-19 scourge would descend on the globe. The initial shelter-in-place orders from our city officials sounded surreal, like something out of a science fiction novel. What would happen to our studies? Would we continue? Could we continue? Was it just another obstacle on the path or a roadblock? Without missing a beat, Cantor and the rabbis scrambled to employ alternate technology to carry on in our mission to become B'nai Mitzvah. Our era has become the Zoom era. We have adapted and thrived. I sometimes think of the Hebrew song I learned as a child, Zoom Gali Gali. A song kibbutzniks sang when working the land together in Israel's early days. Working together became our theme as well. Zoom helped us focus and forced us to efficiently use the time allotted. The big downside was that we didn't have a chance to bond as a group. Although, I have to tell you, during our last few live rehearsals here at Shul, we have, as the social animals we are, been making up for lost time. It's unbelievable to think that 18 months ago, some of us had never even seen the Hebrew alphabet. You'd never know that from the Torah readings today. To the rabbis who generously shared their time and knowledge of our laws, traditions, and customs, we thank you for broadening our horizons and motivating us to seek more. To the Cantor, whose tireless coaching and encouragement drew us out to achieve beyond our dreams, we humbly thank you. You saw it in us, though we sometimes doubted ourselves. I shall always remember the time when, during one of our in-person rehearsals, the cantor, ever mindful of the moment, led those of us who had never read from the Torah scroll before in an emotional recitation of the Shehechiyanim. To our teacher, Tamar, whose steadfast, encouraging, yet firm, guiding hand helped each one of us to reach the heights she saw in us and believed us capable of. We thank you, every one of us. As a tangible token of our appreciation, we have commissioned a beautiful Torah cover to commemorate this wonderful occasion. For me personally, I thank my dad, Dr. Joel Korn, for being my biggest supporter throughout my life, and my late mom, Renee, who always saw the beauty, in every situation. To my B'nai Mitzvah mates, Anne, Sylvia, Debbie, Gabriella, Len, Lupe, Rachel, Sean, Shelley, and Susan. It was a privilege learning together and supporting one another along the way. I can't imagine any other way to have a bat mitzvah. I hope we can find a way to continue our journey. We struggled together, we achieved together, we stand here together now before you. Our success is your success, our achievement is your achievement. In the end, though we all came from different paths, we traveled down the same bumpy road to reach this moment. Of all the stated goals, the most universal desire was to simply connect with one another, with our community, with God. Thank you for your love and support. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Yishar Kochech, thank you so much, Cookie. Earlier this week, we were speaking of Zoom, we were online for Torah on Tap North, and we were looking at a text, a source about Revelation in Mount Sinai, which I think is really appropriate for the moment that we find ourselves in this morning. So it's actually a radical teaching because it looks at the idea that the Israelites were camped at the foot of the mountain, and takes the word in Hebrew, v'yityatzu b'tachtita har, and which should be at the base or the foot of the mountain, but instead the rabbis, in a very radical interpretation in the Talmud, say, well, maybe it actually means they were standing mitachat, underneath the mountain. And the idea is, well, what does that mean? That means that God basically lifted up the mountain like a barrel of beer or some other a cask, and held it over the Israelites and said, it wouldn't be a bad idea for you to take this deal, right? Because otherwise, I'm going to drop this on your head. And then the rabbis say, well, if that were the case, then that would be a pretty strong objection for why we should even need to follow Jewish tradition at all, because we were forced into it. We were at gunpoint, really, right, for all intents and purposes, or barrel point, right, mountain point. So begs the question, why do the rabbis come up with this idea? They answer by saying that though we were, by that argument, we were forced in that moment. We didn't have a choice, or didn't have a better alternative, right? Later on, they cite in the book of Esther that we voluntarily accepted the tradition. So hundreds of years later, right, we said, you know what? This makes sense. We're going to go ahead with this. And so in a sense, what the fascinating thing that the rabbis are doing there, because you got to ask, well, I mean, they're not reading the text the way it's supposed to be read. They're making this up. They're basically taking it out of context and trying to come up with a new understanding. And we got to ask the question, why? Because it's crazy to think that God held us with a mountain over our head and said, you take this or I'm going to wipe all of you out. So what is the reason the rabbis bring this radical idea? It's because they want to get to the resolution. And what's the resolution? It's that, it doesn't really matter how we first came to encounter the tradition. That's not the important thing. Whether we were standing at Sinai or forced or felt like we didn't have a better alternative or whatever, what matters is that we find our way to understanding the tradition's meaning and seeking it out and saying, this is something that I want to be a part of. That's why the rabbis brought this teaching. Because they said, it's more important. What has sustained our people throughout the ages is not necessarily that we were standing at Sinai a long time ago. It's that in every generation since, people have stood up and said, I'm taking on this tradition, and this is meaningful to me. Right? And in very beautiful way, I was struck also during the blessings after the Haftorah, when you were all standing and reciting the brachot together, and I was thinking about the last paragraph in particular in the English. For all this, we thank you and praise you, Adonai our God, for the Torah, for the ability to worship, for the prophets, for the Shabbat that you've given us, Adonai our God, for holiness and for rest, for honor and for glory. May your name be blessed by all that is living, always and forever, and may your promise prove true and everlasting. Baruch atah Adonai, who makes Shabbat holy. That was the last blessing that you all recited together, standing up, making this your Sinai. Right? This is your moment today, and you are such wonderful examples of this crazy radical idea that the rabbis were advancing in that midrash, that it doesn't matter what happened. It doesn't really matter what happened a long time ago. Yes, it's important, but what's really kept us alive and kept Judaism going is people standing up in each generation and saying, this is my tradition, and this is why it matters to me. And the journey that 11 of you who've been on this last 18 months has been a wonderful, crazy, difficult, challenging journey, as Cookie talked about. But it's shown an incredible commitment on each of your parts and on your families supporting you as we navigated in person and Zoom and this. And amazingly, this week, we reached the 2 days beforehand. It just so happened that we were able to be here without wearing masks and be able to see each other's faces and see the warmth and the smiles of not only of you, but your families, but all of us as we celebrate with you this remarkable milestone. So I want to take a moment now to invite each of you up individually, one at a time. I'm going to call you up by name and present you with a certificate recognizing this milestone as we all collectively shep nachas. We all reflect communally in our pride and joy for the journey that you've been on, and not only for reaching this day, but for knowing that this day also, just like we talk to our 13-year-old children when they reach B'nai Mitzvah, that this day is a stepping stone. It is also a threshold to continue journeying in our Jewish pathway and to more being called to the Torah once again and reading from the Torah again and leading the service again and being such vital parts, each of you, of our Shereth Israel Jewish community. So again, Mazal Tov to all, and I'm going to call you up one at a time. And if you want, you can either put out your hand or fist bump or elbow, whatever's comfortable. I don't want anyone to feel awkward when extending a greeting here. So I'll invite you up here, since that's where I'm standing in the camera. Gabriela Aviram. Leonard Allen Cedars. I've never called you Leonard before. Len, mazel tov. Susan Elaine Cedars. Mazel tov, Susan. Mazel tov. Anne Elizabeth Cobert. Yes. IJ Cookie Corn. Mazel tov, Cookie. Congratulations. Thank you so much. Sean Gilmore Meadows. Mazel tov, Sean. Shelly Myers Mitzner. She's got a big team here. Sivia Y. Noble. Sivia, mazel tov. Come on up so people can see you. There we go. There we go. Mazel tov. Deborah Reidinger Rosenfeld. Mazel tov, Debbie. Mazel tov. Mazel tov. Rachel Allison Stock. Great job, Rachel. Mazel tov. Mazel tov. And Guadalupe Reina Toplitz. Let's give them all a big hand. Mazel tov. Mazel tov. That's it. We are so proud of all of you and your families and friends for being there as your teams of support, as our whole community just rejoicing in this special moment for each of you and for us. We'll turn now back to our Sidurim to page 1, and may you continue to go from strength to strength in your learning and your Jewish journey. 181 will continue.